Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The Making of an Impactful BRG Leader. We appreciate you taking time to attend this session. Our webinar is brought to you by the Kaleidoscope Group. My name is Barbara Sanner and I'll be your moderator today. Our goal is to make this an interactive webinar, so we encourage you to participate throughout and submit questions as you think of them. To ask a question, type into the questions box of your GoToWebinar control panel where it says enter a question for staff and click send. We'll ask your questions to the presenters towards the end of today's session. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but if we don't get to yours directly, we'll follow up with you via email. Also, we hope you'll take a few minutes to complete the survey at the end of the webinar. It should take less than 3 minutes to complete. Your feedback is very important to us, and we actually have a special offer for everyone today for those who complete the survey. So we'll talk about that a little more later. Now I'd like to introduce Melanie Munoz, consultant for the Kaleidoscope Group, who will be fielding questions and asking them to our presenters, who are Kelly McMiller and Isaias Zamaripa. Kelly McMiller is Strategic Engagement Leader and Vice President of Consulting at the Kaleidoscope Group. She has more than 16 years of experience in diversity and inclusion and talent management, with prior roles as leader of D&I and staffing for consumer packaged goods company Sara Lee and multimedia companies. At Kaleidoscope, she provides organizations with strategic consulting advice on transformative, long-term, sustainable change in D&I. Kelly has developed, launched, and led curriculum and delivered strategy and education for various employee or business resource groups in many industries. Kelly holds a bachelor's degree from Ball State University and resides in the Chicago area. Isaias Zamaripa is an executive consultant with the Kaleidoscope Group. He spent the first part of his career in staffing in the energy industry with Exxon and Amoco. He then spent a decade with General Mills and won several awards for best practices in ERGs and staffing. Isaias has created a more inclusive culture in several organizations through his leadership with employee and business resource groups, which impacted organizations by providing insight to product development, sourcing diverse talent, and driving business from diverse communities. Isaias holds a bachelor's degree from Marquette University and an MBA from Columbia University. He resides in the Minneapolis area. Now I'll turn it over to Kelly to get us started.
Thanks, Barb. So welcome everyone to the webinar. We're extremely excited about your participation. And now that you know a little bit about myself and Isaias, I'd like to also share a little bit about the Kaleidoscope Group. Kaleidoscope Group, or KG as we affectionately call it, is a full-service diversity and inclusion consulting firm, and we're headquartered here in Chicago, currently led by Doug Harris, our CEO, who's a nationally recognized speaker. We're also just extremely excited. We've worked with clients over the years, I would say managing culture change, creating inclusion, helping with diverse representation, and many other areas for over 30 years. And all of you on the phone today or the webinar will get an opportunity to learn from that experience. And when we have clients with specialized needs, we often will partner with what we call strategic alliance partnerships. So we want to make sure that, you know, this is all we do and that we are full service and here to serve you. So our vision as an organization is really to free the human potential. So at the core of what we do, as my boss would say, is it's about the little guy, right? But if everyone is really able to do that, think about the power that can create in organizations. And we do that through our strength, which is real people having real conversations about real issues to create real change. And we want to help you create that impact today. So this is a partial list of our clients. We work with clients in various different industries, both profit and nonprofit, and we're just really excited to be able to share some of what we've learned and really translate that into impact for you. So just to make sure we're all in the right place, this is a great place for you if you are a business resource group leader or member. You may be in the diversity and inclusion office, and you're a practitioner. And many of the evolution of a lot of these groups, companies, they've grown to go from a small number of BRGs to a large number, and they have ERG or BRG managers, and that's all that they do is manage all of the needs of the group and help them drive success. Some are HR business partners, and you may own a piece of diversity and inclusion as part of your objectives. Or you could be an executive sponsor leading one of these groups and providing strategic guidance, or a business leader. So this is a great place for you if you're really here to learn a little bit more about what you can do. So let's just start by defining what we mean by a resource group. We'll likely refer throughout the webinar to employee or business resource groups. Historically, they may have been known as network or affinity groups, and in some companies that still may exist. But these are voluntary employee-led groups that really work together as a resource for the organization to help foster both a diverse and an inclusive workplace.
And what you've seen is, as we talk to more customers and look at the industry, we've really gone, the pendulum is swayed. I mean, at the beginning, the networks or affinity groups were really focused on, I call it the 3 Fs, flags, food, and fun. And I think the problem with that is everybody always starts to think that's all they are, flags, food, and fun. And we're changing that. Now the pendulum has switched all the way over. If you notice, everybody wants to call themselves a business resource group now. We're not affinity groups. We're not employee resource groups. We're a business resource group. And that's okay. And the problem with going 100% business is that then it becomes like a second job. You've taken away some of the joy and the networking and the ability to have those 3 Fs. I think you've got to have a little combination of both. And it also depends on the growth. Where are you on your growth pattern? Are you just starting? Have you been around for a while and now you're trying to change the perception? So there's a lot of things that affect, I think, the process that you want to go to. Now you're in the right place if your BRG is struggling to engage and motivate its members. Involve leadership or executive sponsors. Shift or improve the organization's perception. Gain support to build partnerships. Make a meaningful impact on the organization. I read all your questions of almost 400 people, and it was very consistent. You really kept asking that same question. How can I engage my members? How can I help members become more successful? How can I tie in our executives to be part of this? So all of you are kind of in the same place and trying to find that solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say in the same place with a different organizational structure and maybe a different evolution, which means that where you start may be different, and we can help support that. So some of the things you'll learn today are the traits to an effective BRG leader. And then what is the recipe for success, if you will, in creating meaningful impact? And then what are those keys to effective partnerships? Because you may have the relationships, but how are you leveraging those relationships for success? So lucky for you, you'll be able to learn from our experiences and our expertise. And so we're going to be covering, as you can see, a lot of incredible things today. And I'd like for you all to stick around. There is a special giveaway, and I'm going to give you that as a resource that will really encompass a lot of what we discussed today and really boil it down to what we call kind of the 7 keys to meaningful BRG impact. And so for those of you that are a bit overwhelmed, there's a lot on your plate, a lot you've been asked to do, we really hope that this resource guide, we know this resource guide will help to guide you on what are the things you should focus on first.
Now, this is the first time we're going to ask you guys to get involved. So we really want to ask you a simple question on what gets in the way of your BRG creating impact, specifically for you. Are you lacking the knowledge or expertise? Do you not have somewhere to go to get that? Do you not know where to begin? Are you lacking the support of the key stakeholders? Are you running out of time? Is D&I giving you money? Do you have the resources? And really, you can create a great mission, you can create a great vision, you can have all the partners in the world, you can have all the support and all the money, but if you don't have active members that are going to show up and put a little blood, sweat, and tears behind this, you're never going to be successful. So if you look at that, I'm going to let Barb now kind of take over and help you do this poll.
Yes, thank you. And it looks like everybody is very familiar with how these work, which is great. We've got the poll up on the screen. If you're not familiar, please just go ahead and click one of those little radio buttons, as we call them, next to the response that best represents what your current struggles are related to your BRG, and let us know what is getting in the way of your BRG creating impact. And we thank you for your time and participation in this. And as we mentioned, please go ahead and put your questions into the questions section and send those to us as you think of them. And we'll get to as many of those as we can today towards the end of the session. So we'll go ahead and close the poll and put the results up on the screen. And I'll let our presenters know what those results are. It looks like we're tied here at 35% each. Time or resources is 35%, and active members is 35%. Interesting results there.
And then as I mentioned, if you don't have the active members, you're not going to be able to reach this. So we'll talk a little about this, how we got people engaged. And then the time and resources is a twofold thing. It's not only time of the employee, but the time to actually create an infrastructure and a structure that creates the ability for you guys to be successful. And with all that, if you don't have the support, which is not only financial, but also, I think, intellectual capital of how talent acquisition works, how does talent development work, when you're getting the data of what are the derailers of your employees specifically in your ERGs as they move up the organization, that becomes, I think, great data. So those two things are definitely we're going to be looking at them.
And what's unique about the fact that those two came up as the highest ones is the key to shifting that is your ability to influence. And we'll talk about that just a little bit as well. That is a key skill, because if you realize, if you're a D&I practitioner, or if you are leading all of these groups or one group, one of the things you realize is you're influencing without authority. And so that's a skill to do that. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and kind of shift now to what are the abilities to leverage BRGs for company success.
We wanted to really focus on, most companies do not know how to do this. Most companies are kind of stuck in trying to create an impact. And that's where we're finding, I think, the biggest issue is how do companies end up. So today I'm going to really be talking about specifically about the Hispanic ERG at General Mills, and really walk you through a whole decade of a story that took 10 years to take. And it's kind of appropriate that we're using the Hispanic heritage on the Hispanic ERG, specifically talking to Hispanic Heritage Month, which started today on September 15th. So this was the Hispanic ERG that General Mills had when I got there. And if you notice the picture, there's mostly some wives and husbands there and even some nephews. So we were even smaller than that group looks like. But to kind of paint the picture, when we got there, when I got there specifically, they were very specific on saying we need to recruit more Latinos at the company. Not only do we need to recruit more Latinos, but we want to be very specific that we need more folks in marketing, consumer insights, and sales. As we look at the demographics of our customer base, this is General Mills, a consumer products company, we need to look more like our customers. We need to have more insight of the customers that look, and we need to also be able to go out and sell that to the different communities. And there was a very laser attention to those functions. So it wasn't just recruiting Latinos, it was recruiting Latinos in those areas. And we basically created a decade of starting from scratch, because that was a very small group, and there's no doubt at that beginning part it was only flags, food, and fun. And we needed to do that because we needed to recruit folks. But we really needed to turn up the input of Latinos. One of the things you need to understand at General Mills, to become a manager, we really didn't recruit people from the outside. We recruited people that came in at the entry level and then moved up within 3 to 5 years, became a manager. So we needed to have retention as key to be successful to drive the end result.
So some of our experience has really revealed a few things that we just want to share with you. One of them would be this leadership skills that are necessary to really drive success. And the other is this D&I expertise, which we spoke to just a moment ago on the poll.
Yeah, and one of the things of D&I expertise that we see is there's a lot of people in the HR function that have a lot of passion for it, but they're new themselves to D&I. And they don't have the experience of how do you tie it to talent acquisition, how do you tie it to onboarding, how do you tie it to talent management, how do you tie it to development. And that's the thing that I think we see as a consistent. The other thing we see is the BRG evolution of going from flag foods and fun to business impact. Every company is going through that, and to some degree, some companies say, well, we need to have it because other companies have it. Okay, who's involved? Let's put it out there, and now they have them out there, and they could put on their website, we have them out there. Every company has great diversity if you look at their website. But the issue with that is then when you show up, it's a different story. The cultural change, I think, is really important because you can spend all your time hiring people and bringing them there, but if the culture of the company is not inclusive, and when I talk about inclusive, it's not just treating people nicely. It's how do you rate people differently? How do you act? How do you treat people differently to create equity? And that's the essence of diversity. It's that cognitive dissonance in the manager's head saying, so to treat you equally, I got to treat you differently. The whole concept of the golden rule. You know, I want to be treated the way I want to treat others as I want to be treated. Well, I don't want to be treated the way you want to be treated. I want to be treated the way I want to be treated. So that's the platinum rule. How do you treat people the way they want to be treated?
Yeah, I think the other issue around culture change as it relates to resource groups is the fact that in some organizations, BRGs are the diversity and inclusion strategy. And that's really a lot of weight and expectations put on those groups. And then when you set those groups up in that way, then you really aren't setting them up for success, because who should own culture change is really the leadership, right?
Yeah,
Owning
and HR,
results.
yeah.
And then you have HR, marketing, all of these other groups really integrating this into the process. And so the role for business resource groups is really around strategy and guidance to say, here's where we in our company, in our organization, need to focus on to fix this problem. And here's the problem, if you will, from our constituency's perspective.
And that's where I think brings our next problem, which is our business impact. The inability to make a business impact becomes a constant running theme for either new ERGs or ERGs that have been around for a while. What is the impact that you're doing? So you've got to start to shift and get the membership of your ERG to buy into that mission and vision. If they don't buy into it, you're not going to get the results you want. The other thing I think is the BRG focus. In other words, do you have a clear focus on the mission of the business, of D&I, and getting people involved?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing here is a strategy is just about what you focus on versus what you don't focus on, and being intentional about making that decision is really important. So if you're the D&I officer or practitioner, you might want to say, here are the pillars I'd like BRGs to play in. And if you're the BRG, you want to look at your mission, look at the company's objectives, D&I objectives, and say, here's where we really want to play, and create that laser focus.
Now, when we talk about partnerships, you need to start to create, and when I say you, I'm talking about the ERG leaders, you need to start to create the relationships with the functional business units leaders. You need to start to create relationships with talent acquisition. You need to start to understand what I call the derailers of your own employees when they come into the company. You need to try to understand, how do the hiring numbers show what's happening? Do you have a leaky bucket in your pipeline of leadership? And by having those partnerships, it's going to help you become a better ERG that's going to be impactful and that actually is going to have the business impact that you're looking for. And finally, you also got to create partnerships on the outside. You really got to understand who are the partners outside of your walls that are going to help you reach your goals, whether it's community, whether it's affecting the marketplace, whether it's affecting culture, whether it's getting best practices. That's really important.
Yeah, so as Isaiah is really discussing this, it's really about rethinking how we see business resource groups. I mean, ultimately, these are really small businesses within a business, and that is a shift in thinking. So, some questions to think about as you think about this shift is if you operated your resource group more like a business, would it change what you required of those leaders within the BRG infrastructure? So BRG leaders may at that point, if you're running a business, you want qualified people, you want them to work on certain skills to build that muscle. But ultimately, it's really about, do we have the right leadership skills to actually help to drive change in the organization? And then as you think about this shift in business, you really want to know and understand the needs of all your key stakeholders. So let's talk about who those key stakeholders are. So if it's a business, these are your employees. For BRGs, these are your members. If it's a business, you're looking at your customers. And this is just a short list, but that could be first and foremost the business units. Those are your customers. Your manager, sometimes the overlooked person that could be a customer, but their support is really required. And then the D&I office, and this is interesting because some of you may have HR as your investor, but ultimately where your budget comes from, and if you don't have a budget and you're trying to get a budget, you create value, you'll get that budget. And then their partners are extensive. I have HR listed here, but if you're trying to drive something in the marketplace as one of your focus areas, marketing obviously might be a part of that, right? And then as we look at your board of directors, we're talking about senior leaders here. And so is your mission of your BRG clear? Because people cannot connect and get on board and get motivated and follow you if that's not clear.
And I think part of the issue that occurs, there's a lot of great ideas that are being thrown out by your employees and part of the ERG, but sometimes it's just a checkoff strategy. I mean, the example is you want to give input to the marketing campaign on X and Y, and the marketing people give you the opportunity to look at the new ads, and you kind of give your opinion. But the problem was that ad is already created, and they're just finding out what you think about it. If you're really making an impact, you're in the ideation meeting. You're meeting with the people on the outside when you're creating the idea. Now you have impact. The other way is, it's a checkoff strategy. Oh yeah, we're doing it, but you're not creating impact.
And the other thing that you're bringing to mind for me is it's a push and pull,
Yep.
right? So you may be in the place where they're coming to you as an afterthought. You like to be in the place where they're coming to you first. So what are the skills that create that? And because you may not have to wait on that, if
Right.
you will. And then lastly, do you have a clear business impact plan? What business doesn't have a plan? And then as you get more focused and intentional to create impact, you'll achieve that plan.
And I think the last one is the most important one, as everybody has said. If you can create everything you have and all the partnerships, but if you don't have the people that buy in that vision and be able to do the work necessary, you're never going to create value. So a lot of this today in my story is about how did we engage our employees to become involved. So as you remember in my story, I talked about the recruiting solution, and we said we needed to bring in more people into the pipeline. We needed to be more specific on the functions. And our first attempt at understanding this was really trying to understand our brand and our audience. So when we looked at our brand, we said, well, what do we think we represent? But we also went to the campuses and asked the students, so how do you see us? We went to our competitors and talked about how do you see them and how do you see us from the experience perspective. And then we also spent some time with some of our outside partners and saying, how is the marketplace perceiving us as, to hiring people that are Latinos and working? The overall consensus was, God, General Mills is a great place to work and a great company. God, but I don't want to move to Minneapolis. I'm from a warm place, and I'm not saying all Latinos are from warm places. That's a stereotype, of course. But I don't want to go there. I'm going to be the only one that looks like me, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to find my food. I'm not going to find my music. And that's the perception because you've never been there. And that was important for our strategy, is really understanding how we were being perceived and how we could change that. The second part, we really assessed our gaps. We went back and looked at where were we hiring? Where were we getting turndowns? When were people leaving? And then we also looked at the function, because you got to stop looking at diversity as a monolith. People say, oh, we have 30% diversity. Yeah, but where? What jobs? What levels? What ethnicity? So when you start to break that down, you start to get a very clear answer where you go, wow, we don't have a single manager in finance that's Asian or African American. Wow, we don't have a single person in marketing that's a director that is Hispanic. Wow, we don't have a single female of color that's working out in the plant as a plant manager. That's when you really start to laser focus on how do we develop people to get those jobs, how do we hire people to get those jobs. When we started to really focus on marketing, consumer insights, and sales, ERG was the key to success, because we worked specifically with the employee resource groups to become the face of General Mills. So it wasn't just getting bodies in front to go to the conferences. It was getting the right bodies and the right backgrounds and the right experiences. We were getting the best General Mills had to offer that also happened to be Hispanic in engineering, in sales, in consumer insights, and in marketing. And now they became the front of the house. They would meet you on campus. They would meet you at the diversity conferences. When you came to your interview, guess who picked you up at the airport? That same person. They're the ones that took you to dinner, took you to a nice dinner in Minneapolis downtown. Wow, this was totally different than what I thought. And then they're the ones that then coached you on the interview that you were about to have. They were ones that did the follow-up. We created also an event called the Hispanic Revisit Weekend, where we actually flew people back in that had offers. And we did this in January. And if you know January in Minneapolis, it's cold. Hace frío, as they say. So one of the things that we did was we wanted to show them what it is to live in cold. So we were able to spend a Friday on campus. On Saturday, we would take them out and show them the whole city. Every Saturday night for 8 years, we would have a dinner at my house where we would bring in the folks and the presidents and the networks and really get focused. Again, we were very strategic. The marketing people took out the marketing people. The single people were taking out the single people. The married people were taking out the married people. The people that had kids, because the conversations were going to be different. That's part of this strategy, is you got to sell to what their needs are. The strategic partners that we selected were key in being as successful. Our relationships were with Neshamba, the Consortium for Graduate Study of Management, and for SHIP. And what we started to have, it was not only the same people that were going to those conferences, but then the people we hired the year before, they became part of the team. And the common theme in all this was, you're joining La Familia. You're joining the family. The family was our key kind of moniker that everybody got and understood. Because if you're joining the family, I'm going to treat you right. I'm going to be sure that you're coming here. I'm going to be sure you're onboarded right. I want to be sure you're successful. If you look at the right-hand corner on the top, that was really the first time we had a little diversity at Neshamba. Before we got there, and again, we were it was 3 white guys with a picture of ice fishing saying, come to Minnesota. That was not going to be powerful to bring in Latinos. If you look on the left-hand side, on the top, that's what we started to look like. It was all these people from Venezuela, Colombia, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and now they're speaking Spanish, they're talking. I mean, our booth was energetic, there was people. We brought in our presidents to speak at the conferences, to speak at the lunches. We actually sponsored a luncheon as we started to grow. We actually did an event with all the presidents of the chapters, because we really saw we wanted to work with the presidents of the chapters.
So when you look at the work you've done, not only there, but even in other organizations, it was really a recipe for success. So let me just highlight a few things that were key to the solution here. There was a strategically tied ERG mission, and again, strategic and specific to the business needs, in this case, of recruiting, onboarding, development, and retention. So the ERG was focused. There was intentionality as it related to developing a vision that had impact. So again, the group said, this is where we want to have impact. This is how we want to have that impact. This is what success looks like. There was huge, and Isaiah didn't go into it as much, but there was senior leadership involvement down to senior leaders opening up their homes as well to help connect on the La Familia brand that was created. And consistency in the way that this ERG executed.
And I think that's important, the consistency. We knew every year we were going to go to Nashamba. We knew we had committed to being part of SHIP. We knew we were committed to being part of Consortium for Graduate Study and Management. At one point, we had the local chapters of SHIP, NSBE, Black MBA, and Hispanic MBA. All the presidents of the local chapters of Minneapolis were from General Mills. That's being intentional and saying these are the partners we're going to create, and this is the impact we want to do.
Yes, and absolutely. So that the tracking and monitoring of success is critical too. So understanding what success looked like was, obviously the KPIs, but then that monitoring of success. So Isaiah mentioned knowing where candidates were being stopped and where were the gaps around that. And so they were able to shore things up to really move forward and fix those gaps, even in process. You're not going to know that if you're not monitoring the success. And then understanding the perceptions of diverse employees as well as hiring managers. And this is critical because it was both sides, right? So you had diverse employees coming in, what will it take, understanding the employees that were there, but also what are the challenges of hiring managers as they begin to define the profile of success? What does leadership look like, and am I only used to seeing it in one way versus multitude of ways?
Yeah, and that's the key. Again, creating the definition of good, expanding that. And that's when you started to see people staying because people were getting promoted.
Absolutely.
That's when you started to see people moving forward, and the numbers started to exponentially grow every year. And part of that was also tied to development. I mean, we started then a Hispanic Development Day, which we would do during, obviously, Hispanic Heritage Month. And it started out as a one-day event. It then went into a weekend event. And it then went into where we would fly in all the people from the plants and the sales offices. And that created, again, La Familia, the culture, the group, making people be successful.
So ultimately what we're looking at is a unique strategic framework that looked at attraction, recruiting, onboarding, engaging, and then the ERG also in place to develop and retain. And then finally, this is a diversity recruitment strategy that involved all key stakeholders. So when you looked at the booth for recruiting, you had someone that was a hiring manager there that could really impact that person's ability to be hired. So let's talk about the results.
Yeah, when you look at the results, you got to remember, we started like this, and it was, less than 20 folks. In 10 years, we grew to over 250 members. We had the highest level of Hispanic managers in the history of General Mills. And here's the key. It wasn't just Latinos that we were recruiting. We were recruiting Latinos in marketing, sales, consumer insights, and engineering. Sometimes you look at numbers, we've increased our numbers, but in what jobs, at what levels? And that's a negative that people don't really look at. Wow, we've done a lot of increase in Latino, but at what level and what's the jobs? Are they really creating a business impact? And I think that's what really differentiated us, was developing those relationships and creating that impact. The other part, we started to win all these awards. I mean, we became the Nashamba Company of the Year. I told you about the Bring a Friend Night. We actually would have over 700 people showing up to that. And we actually showed a savings of $3 million of people that we hired that we would have probably hired through an agency from the outside. But that event itself not only created a brand of, if you're a person of color, you need to be working in General Mills if you're in Minneapolis, but it also created retention because the title was Bring a Friend. So you were bringing your friend with you to show them where you work, who I work with, what's our business like. And we went from hiring, these are the open jobs, help us get people, to who's looking, to who's a good candidate, so the passive candidate. So that's why we would have 700 people at an event. And then we'd have our CEO speak. Then we'd break off into business functions to talk about the culture of the company and what we're looking for. And then at the end of the night, drinks and food, and all the ERGs had their tables to talk about the history. This truly created a brand that was differentiated from anybody out there. We also won Latina Style Company of the Year. We won Best Places for Latinos to Work For. We got on those lists. We were in Diversity Inc.'s Top 50. The National Hispanic Corporate Council highlighted us for best recruiting practices for our Hispanic Revisit Weekend. We were on a consistent change and impact.
You know, the only thing I'll add to that great story of impact is two things. So one, because of what you've done there was this retention. So you talked in this experience to me before about starting out with a leaky bucket, right?
Yeah.
So you can do all this work, but if the culture isn't really, able to sustain the talent, then you can lose them. So you have that retention strategy kind of built in through this process of La Familia, if you will, because it continued after I'm hired. The other piece is D&I ambassadors. So through this process, because of the full engagement of leadership, you really had D&I, if you will, diversity and inclusion ambassadors were created, because there's a two-way learning when you go to the Hispanic MBA. There's a two-way learning when you go to the Black MBA. So I'm understanding more now about a particular group I had no idea, especially if I don't have that exposure.
No doubt about it. I mean, for example, when we went to the SHIP conference, one of our advisors was the vice president of technology. So he reported directly to CEO. He had all of the plants reporting to him and all technology reporting to him. So I brought him to SHIP to go to the conference, and he literally was the only white male in a room of a couple thousand Latinos. And we had a dinner where we got the new hires to sit down with them and let them hear their stories of what it was to work out in a plant and their perceptions and how were people treating them and how they thought, these guys aren't engineers, these guys are the hourly workers. I mean, he heard the real life stories. And that really affected his perception of how inclusive of environment did we really have.
Absolutely. I think the final key to success around this impact is the ability to get people galvanized around a specific initiative. So if you're a business resource group and you're working in all pillars and all areas and trying to impact all areas, I strongly encourage you to reconsider that and back up and say, where is our laser focus? Where can we have that type of impact? And then how do we galvanize these stakeholders around a specific initiative so you really can get that impact and then tell that story. So I want to just kind of shift to these 7 keys to meaningful BRG impact quickly. So here are some of those keys. Cultural competence. You have to immerse yourself in really understanding first why you think the way you think, how that might even connect to how others think that are in your space. And so BRG leaders have to be culturally competent. And that is a big thing. And you can start to even collaborate where there are synergies with others, if you will, other BRGs. And then skillful BRG leadership. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a moment, but there are several skills that are really key to creating that impact. So the impact isn't always about the what you do, it's the who you are as well. And then, is your group really strategically aligned? And where is that alignment? It should be clear to you and your group, and it should be clear to others in the organization, especially if you want to shift that value, the business value of your groups. And then we've talked about areas of focus a lot. In our space, we'll often say workplace, workforce, marketplace, community, and suppliers are kind of those key industry areas. But sometimes with clients, they'll even laser focus it even further and say talent, right? So figure out what your areas of focus are. Think about if you want to hitch your wagon to what's going on in the organization and make sure you're hitching that to something that can really create impact, not a negative initiative, if you will, that people are having, but something that people have already bought into. Organizational support, we've talked about that a lot, so I won't spend time there, but it is critical. And then I can't emphasize enough strategic partnerships. So the Women's Network may need to connect, if you're in an engineering industry, to Women in Science or something to that effect. If you are a LGBT group, are you connected to some degree to HRCI, if you will, human resources, when you think about the HR impact. And then when you look at Hispanics, if you will. So you want to connect in a strategic way, but not only from a ethnicity perspective, but an industry perspective. Where are you likely going to get candidates, if it's a recruiting initiative, that will meet the requirements of the positions?
And key to that is, don't use the excuse, well, this group doesn't exist. When we were at General Mills and we were trying to create community, because again, we realized to retain people, they not only got to do a good job and get promoted, they got to like where they live. They got to have a community. So within your small community of General Mills, there's not enough people. And what we did, we started the Latino Employee Networks of the Twin Cities. We actually went out and networked with Best Buy, Target, Medtronic, 3M, and got all their Hispanic employee resource groups together. And we started to have events where we were trying to talk about the community and getting growth.
Right.
And that was the strategic partnership. Don't use the excuse it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Create it.
There you go. There you go. And my mistake. So with LGBT is HRCI. It's really, what's the name of the organization?
HRC.
It's HRC. Thank you very much. And so Human Rights Campaign. Yeah. And so finally, we talk about influencing change, and this is a critical skill that we all must learn. But the key is, when you're influencing change, do you understand what I call the currencies, what's important to the people you're trying to influence? Or are you coming at them with, help me with this, help me with this? People are more likely to listen when they know that you hear and understand them, and then you connect what you want to what they need.
Yeah.
And so you came here today because you're struggling with how to engage and motivate or involve members or executive sponsors, enhancing your organization's perception, determining how to really make that meaningful impact. And today we also taught you a few other things. So you learned about what BRG impact looks like in the organization.
Yeah, and I think, we don't want to say that our solution, specifically with what I did at General Mills, is going to fit everybody. It has to do with what was the need at the time. I think when you focus on what's the impact you can create, that's where you really create the BRG impact. But you got to start to think of it as a business. The key of our success, I think, at General Mills was everybody felt that they were part of La Familia. So in other words, that was their business. They were going to be making it successful. We knew who our employees were. We knew who our support was. We knew who our investors were, and we kept everybody happy. And it's just like Kelly said before, if you're generating impact, you will get the money. If you're generating retention, you will get the money. And that's what we were able to do. We really doubled and tripled and quadrupled some of the money we were spending in some of these organizations because we started to hire 10 and 15 people out of those organizations. We would have not continued to do that if we were not hiring those people and those people weren't being successful.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add to that is that the complexity and the uniqueness is different, right? So there's no one size fit all. And so what we did is really talked a lot about where there was a recruitment or a diverse representation gap. But there are other areas that you can focus on to increase impact, and you can achieve that, but you've got to partner and understand what's going on in your organization. But again, operating a lot more like a business.
And the one thing you got to remember is, this was over 10 years. We did stub our toes. We did recruit people that weren't successful that came on board. And that's when we started to really focus on how do we make them successful? How do we work with them? How do we ensure their managers are being supportive? How do we ensure that that family that's there with kids is getting engaged and being part of Minneapolis? Because sometimes we just hope it's going to happen magically, and it doesn't.
Right, so this stuff can get really complicated, and it's really helpful because even in my work before joining the Kaleidoscope group, Kaleidoscope was actually, a consultant we hired, and without that strategy and guidance, I'm not sure we would have taken 10 years as well. But we're now able to leverage the experiences we have and keep you all from having kind of some of the same mistakes. So let me just quickly share with you. We distilled all of our experiences down at the Kaleidoscope group, working with clients, and even with Isaiah and I, our practical experience, really down to several models, if you will, and several kind of key skills. And so one of those models is this BRG Leader Development Journey. And so really it's about that immersion, right? Do you have that cultural competence? Do you understand organizational culture within your organization? Team building? Do you have the influencing and collaboration skills? Partnership, which we've talked a lot about, but are those relationships strong, and have you identified the right external partnerships? And then really achievement, which is getting to success requires a strategic perspective and an ability to understand the dynamics of culture change. So our BRG Leader Development Journey really focuses on making you as a leader have the right traits and capabilities to drive change. So even though some of you may have come specifically to this webinar really interested in the development aspect, Kaleidoscope Group also offers solutions that are in the area of strategy, structure, as well as measurement and impact. So regardless of your need, we are here to support you. So thank you all for sticking around. We're going to open things up for questions here momentarily, but I also want to flag the fact that and remind you those 7 keys to meaningful BRG impact will be coming to you in your inbox. So watch for that. It could be possibly too that it went to spam, so check that out as well and make sure. But this guide will really help you start to figure out where you need to focus on. And so finally, what are your next steps before we open things up here for questions? So if you actually go to kgdiversity.com/let's talk, you'll have the ability to quickly schedule a 30-minute complimentary consultation so we can take this from an example that we learned here from Isaiah's to your specific situation and really start to get at how you can create that impact and where you might begin. So quickly, let me take you through how easy this is. So first, once you go to kgdiversity.com, you're going to see first the ability to choose a date. And so what you'll see is some are grayed out and some are orange. And so for those that I believe are orange is availability. And then you'll fill out this form. So you have the choosing the date, clicking there where the availability is, which is in the gray, so I said that incorrectly. And then you have the opportunity to pick the time that works for you. So times are grayed out that are not available, and those that are bolded are available. And then finally, you just complete this quick form with your name, company, and email. And then if there is something specific around what you want to talk about, let us know that, and we'll come prepared to be able to have that dialogue with you so you get a lot out of this conversation. And then finally, just reserve my spot. Click that button just to finish out and take care of that, and then you'll have Melanie Munoz who will really take care of you. And actually, I actually want to turn this over to Melanie because Melanie has been getting all of your questions, and we want to save a little time to be able to answer some of those questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your participation and questions today. The first question we have here is, do you recommend appointing BRG leaders or having them be elected?
You know, we went through that at Johnson Controls. We started out, people were being elected by the membership, and then we tried to change it to appointed. And we did run into some negative feeling that all of a sudden now, you know, their experiences weren't important, that their voice wasn't important. I think what we learn about this is you need to vet your leaders. You need to be sure that your leaders are good performers. You need to be sure your leaders are, their managers are supporting their time. And when you're really doing it right, you know, people can be asked to get develop into the leader of that group. But if you don't have the manager's investment that they say they're going to do it, if you don't have the HR support, if you don't have the vetting, that's where problems occur. You know, and that's why I think you got to have a fine line between appointing and just picking anybody.
Yeah, and I think it's a combo, which is essentially, as I hear you talk, it's really a combination of the two. So you may say, well, we want to achieve both, right? We want to make sure that this is still employee-led, still employee-driven, but maybe there is a role on your particular BRG leadership team that is a hypo where you go to HR and get potential people to be on the leadership team in the chair role, for example.
The next question we have is, how do you address key power holders, i.e. the VP of HR, talent acquisition, who might be resistant or don't understand or feel threatened by diversity efforts to fill in the gaps?
Feel threatened by diversity efforts. So 2 things. It's really the same formula, whether you're a business leader or a VP of HR or your mindset is power. Play to the power. So ultimately, it's what's important to the other person. And so again, we have to really put on listening skills to understand that, and questioning to really get at what is really important to that person. And once you understand that, then you don't even try to respond right in the moment. Actually, like, I want to come back and actually talk with you more about how we can support that as a BRG. And then you come back to that person with a thought through plan. Maybe you need to talk to others as well to then say, here's how our BRG can help to fill in that gap.
Again, I think the important part of this is talking about, if you're a consumer products company, it's not hard to sell why you need diversity. But if you're a B2B company, why you start to sell diversity is because, look, diversity at its essence is getting different people to look at the same problem that are going to create different solutions. And that's what you got to do, is say, look, when I look up at upper management, it's everybody that graduated from Iowa, that has 1.2 children and then lives in this specific area. You got to look at the obvious. And when you say, I look like this and I look upstairs and nobody looks like me, that's going to create retention. So in other words, people will start to leave. So is there an issue that's going to affect the business? That's how you start that conversation.
So what you're really saying is get it off of the individual,
right,
and get it put onto the business. And it's hard for people to argue,
right,
if we're not talking about what you want and
right,
what I want, our personal passions, but we're talking about what's most important for the business.
There you go.
Great. And I have a question for you, Isaias. So how did the majority population receive to this focus on the BRGs, and how did the Latino example transfer over to the other BRGs?
Okay. Well, we started to have, number one, intern revisit weekends. We also had and the Hispanic revisit weekend. Then we had an Asian weekend. And actually, the African American network had also started the MLK weekend before we started ours. So everybody learns from the same thing. We would have the same kind of events that everybody was doing. And to some degree, it was their own familia. And I think the example of the Hispanic ERG was really powerful because it grew so big and so long. But we were always very well represented with African Americans. So that's why we focused on the Hispanics and the marketing. But we did do the same thing with LGBT, and then veterans right now is probably one of the bigger ERGs that are being formed out there. So I think it flows very easily that way of what works in one place can work in another. You just got to customize it. Yeah. Now the second part of that question was, how did the majority felt? They got it. They understood that if they continue to recruit people that look like them and just like them, we were going to be very monolithic in our decisions. They became part of the solution. They became our ambassadors. And that was, there were people that were part of the ERGs that weren't Hispanic, that were part because they wanted to know more about the culture and more about the people.
Yeah, and I would add to that look at other BRGs as partners. And so it needs to be a culture of us modeling inclusive behaviors. Mm-hmm. And so if you are a BRG or BRG leader, and I say cultural competence is key, that means we have to model what collaboration looks like. So if that other BRG leader isn't coming to you sharing, or diversity and inclusion offices and help to facilitate a dialogue where we're learning from each other, then go straight to them. I love what you did. Share with me what it took, what were some of your obstacles, etc., and vice versa. So we need to model inclusive behaviors and collaboration.
All right. So how do you get your talent acquisition team on board for utilizing your BRGs?
They've got to understand the real simple concept of, you want people to hire people and go be attracted to people that look like themselves. I mean, if you go to a place and everybody looks one way and you look a different way, you're not going to feel that that's a very inclusive place, no matter how well they treat you. I think at the essence, it's what does your brand look like? We did the same thing with African Americans and with Asians and with women engineers. We really spent the time to do that. I mean, think about it. You're going to the Society of Women Engineers, and it's all white males in this one company trying to recruit female engineers. It's saying something. They've got to understand the brand that they have, and does it affect the reality of who's being hired?
The other piece you might look at as well is talent acquisition typically has goals and objectives. They may or may not be the same in terms of diversity and inclusion attraction, but if whatever their goals and objectives are, you need to find that out. And then once you understand what they're measured by, again, you find out what's important to them, and then you connect to it and say, here's how we can help. Absolutely.
So for small businesses, what would you suggest to identify and collaborate with other ERGs or BRGs locally?
You know, again, depending what city you're in, there's Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, you know, African American Chamber of Commerce. There's a lot of other places out there that can become the center for you to network with folks. I mean, we created the Latino Employee Networks of the Twin Cities on our own. We just went out and networked with other companies and created our own. So I think as a small company, you got to figure out, are there centers that create that connection that you can jump on and start to talk about the diversity topic?
I would say create your own, right? If there is not a groups or other companies that have BRGs that you can start to connect with and learn from, create for example, young professionals is something I've seen pop up a lot, and there's young professional communities. So think about it, BRGs wouldn't exist if there was a lot of us represented, whatever us is, right? It exists because there's a gap, and there are other companies in your market that are experiencing that same gap. So start to connect externally around where you see those groups, and then create a local, whatever the city is, young professional group. And then the other thing I would think about is maybe it's about an affinity. So if you're a Hispanic organization, is there a Nashimba chapter in your area? And so if you think about it, there are similar connective missions, if you will, of both an association and a BRG.
What are some typical measures of BRG impact?
It's a great question. Some of what I've seen mostly, which is what we've talked about here, is recruitment, traction specifically. So how did you improve around that if your focus is within that talent space? Retention as well, development. Now this is an interesting one because the same people being selected for development opportunities. So if you're in that talent space, that's definitely one. Engagement scores around surveys. If your organization doesn't have a diversity and inclusion index or diversity and inclusion questions as part of an engagement survey, I would strongly encourage you all to determine how do we make that happen, or just at least raise the question. And then more sophisticated companies are now putting on the survey, are you a member of an ERG or BRG? And then they're able to track higher engagement for those people that are involved. But essentially in both of those examples, people start to put a premium on leadership development and what the BRG can offer in that space. And so those are some of the areas. And then obviously under business impact, we talked about it being easy for CPG companies, consumer packaged goods companies. But when we start to see an uptick in new markets that they're not touching yet, the company then begins to touch that, leveraging that particular affinity group or resource group. Did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think the only thing that I would say is also think about how is it that your company wants to see the impact. So talk in their language.
All right, and last question is going to be around budget. So everyone's really impressed with GM's programming, but obviously there was a budget attached. So how do you go about asking for those funds, and what departments typically oversee those funds? Is it HR or is it the D&I department?
Again, and every company is going to be different, but I think most of the time D&I has a budget to run the employee resource groups. In some companies, the employee resource groups have grown up from, I call it a grassroots drive. The moment you start to show impact, the moment you start to show insight, either to consumer insights or to product development or to hiring, then all of a sudden you can start to ask for budgets.
Yep.
If you're just asking for budgets for flags, food, and fun, you're going to run into trouble. Now, if you have a leaky bucket, flag, foods, and fun may be important because that's going to help retention. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to overstate that it's not, it doesn't always have to be directly tied to business impact and all business to be impactful to the company.
Yep. And you can look at business leaders. So for example, if I know I can help marketing meet their business objective this year, then I will go to the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and partner with them, and they may be able to, help with budgeting as well. Okay? So I think I just really quick want to thank you all for your interactive participation. The questions have really rolled in. Again, go to kgdiversity.com/let's talk and get schedule your free 30-minute complimentary consultation. And we're just really excited to have had you participate in this discussion. So thank you so much for your time. And I don't know if Barb wants to say anything else, but we really appreciate your participation.
Yes, thank you. I want to say thank you to our presenters today, Kelly and Isaias, and for Melanie for handling all of our questions. And thanks to everyone for your questions today. It was a great session. We wish you a wonderful rest of your day.